Have you ever walked out into your garden, completely excited to pick a beautiful, juicy red tomato, only to find the bottom is completely black and rotting? Or maybe you have stared at your strawberry patch, wondering why you have a million green leaves, but absolutely zero fruit. It is incredibly frustrating. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing a massive question and answer session focused entirely on the holy trinity of summer gardening: strawberries, tomatoes, and mulching. I am going to reveal a few secrets today that completely contradict what your grandparents probably taught you about gardening. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how to double your harvest with half the effort. I promise you, some of these answers are going to shock you. So, drop a comment right now and tell me, what is your absolute biggest gardening fail? Let us embrace the mistakes and dive right in. Before we get to your specific questions, we need to set the stage. Gardening is not just about putting seeds in the dirt and hoping for the best. It is a biological system. For hundreds of years, farmers relied on trial and error to figure out what works. But today, we have science on our side. Tomatoes and strawberries are two of the most popular home garden crops in the entire world, but they are also the most misunderstood. They are heavy feeders, they are prone to diseases, and they are incredibly picky about water. That is exactly where mulching comes into the picture. Mulch is not just a decoration to make your flower beds look pretty. It is the protective armor for your soil. Understanding how these three elements interact is the key to unlocking a massive harvest. So, let us start tackling your most pressing questions one by one. Let us kick things off with a question that floods my inbox every single spring. People ask, why are my strawberry plants surviving but completely refusing to produce any actual fruit? Well, the answer usually comes down to one massive mistake during planting. Most beginners plant their strawberries way too deep. Have you ever heard of the crown of the plant? It is the thick part where the roots meet the stems. If you bury that crown under the soil, it will rot. Period. Your plant might push out a few green leaves, giving you false hope, but it will slowly suffocate and die. On the flip side, if you plant it too shallow and expose the roots to the air, they will dry out. You need to find that perfect middle ground. The soil line must be exactly halfway up the crown. Imagine you are putting a tiny life jacket on the plant. It needs to float right on the surface. Here is a great example. I once visited a neighbour's garden and they had 50 strawberry plants buried up to their necks. We spent an hour gently lifting them up with a trowel. Guess what happened? Within 3 weeks, they had flowers everywhere. It is a huge myth that plants can just push their way up if planted too deep. So, check your beds today. Are your plants buried alive? Fixing this one simple thing changes absolutely everything about your harvest. Moving on to our next highly requested topic. What in the world are tomato suckers, and do I really need to cut them off? This is a huge debate in the gardening world. A sucker is a small new branch that grows in the joint between the main stem and a main branch. Think of it as the armpit of the tomato plant. If you leave these suckers alone, they will grow into entirely new main stems, producing their own flowers and fruit. Sounds great, right? More stems mean more tomatoes. But that is actually a dangerous myth. If you let every sucker grow, your plant becomes a massive, tangled jungle. The airflow stops completely, which invites terrible fungal diseases. Plus, the plant spends all its energy growing leaves instead of ripening the fruit. A friend of mine refused to prune his tomatoes last year. He ended up with a giant green monster bush that produced 100 tiny green tomatoes that never ripened before the frost hit. By pinching off those suckers when they are small, you direct the energy exactly where you want it. You get bigger, juicier, and healthier tomatoes. So do not be afraid to grab your scissors. Your tomato plants actually want you to give them a haircut. Now, let us talk about the absolute magic of mulching. A viewer asked, is mulching really necessary, or is it just a waste of time and money? Let me be very clear. Skipping mulch is the biggest mistake you can make in a summer garden. Mulch acts like a protective blanket for your soil. During the blazing hot days of July, bare soil bakes in the sun. The water evaporates almost instantly, and the delicate plant roots get cooked. When you put down a thick layer of mulch, it keeps the soil cool and locks in the moisture. I did an experiment last summer. I took a thermometer and measured the temperature of bare soil in the afternoon sun. It was over 90 degrees. Then I measured the soil right next to it, under 3 inches of straw mulch. It was a perfectly comfortable 75 degrees. That is a massive difference. There is a crazy myth out there that mulch attracts millions of bad bugs to eat your plants. While it might give a hiding spot to a few slugs, the benefits completely outweigh the risks. Mulch prevents weeds from stealing your nutrients, and as it breaks down, it feeds your soil. So, if you want to water less and weed less, you must start mulching immediately. Here is a fantastic question about strawberries. What do I do with all these long vines shooting out of my plants? Those long vines are called runners, and they are how strawberry plants reproduce. The mother plant shoots out a vine and a tiny baby plant forms at the end of it, rooting into the soil. It is fascinating to watch. But should you keep them or cut them? That depends on what you want. If you are trying to fill in an empty garden bed with free plants, let them grow. But if you want a massive harvest of big, sweet berries this year, you must ruthlessly cut those runners off. Every bit of energy the mother plant spends pushing out a baby is energy taken away from growing fruit. It is a common myth that leaving runners gives you an endless supply of berries forever. In reality, it just creates an overcrowded patch of tiny, sour fruit. Think of it like this. If you are trying to run the marathon, you cannot do it while carrying 3 extra people on your back. Your strawberry plants feel the same way. Grab your pruners and snip those runners as close to the main plant as possible. Your taste buds will thank you later. Let us address a complete heartbreak in the tomato world. You asked, why do my beautiful tomatoes have a flat, black, rotting spot on the very bottom? This condition is called blossom end rot, and it is incredibly common. The old gardening myth says that this happens because your soil does not have enough calcium. The traditional advice is to crush up eggshells and sprinkle them around the plant. But here is the shocking truth. Your soil probably has plenty of calcium. The real problem is that your plant cannot drink it. Calcium moves through the plant via water. If you let your soil dry out completely and then flood it with water, the plant panics. This inconsistent watering stops the calcium from reaching the tip of the fruit, causing the cells to collapse and rot. Crushing eggshells will not fix this quickly because eggshells take months or even years to break down in the soil. The real solution is fixing your watering schedule. You need deep, consistent moisture. I once ruined half of my Roma tomatoes because I went on a weekend trip and forgot to set up a watering timer. When I came back and soaked them, the damage was already done. Keep that soil evenly moist and blossom end rot will become a thing of the past. We had a lot of questions asking what is the absolute best material to use for mulching vegetable beds. There are so many options at the garden centre and it can be totally overwhelming. For vegetable gardens, specifically around tomatoes and strawberries, organic mulches are always the best choice. My personal favourite is clean, seedless straw. It is light, it reflects the sunlight, and it breaks down beautifully over the season. Another great option is untreated wood chips, but you have to be careful. There is a persistent myth that wood chips will steal all the nitrogen out of your soil. This is only partially true. If you mix fresh wood chips deep into the dirt, they will tie up nitrogen. But if you just lay them on top of the soil as a mulch, they are completely safe and highly effective. I strongly advise against using fresh, wet grass clippings piled on thick. I tried this once, and the wet grass heated up so much as it decomposed that it literally cooked the stems of my tomato plants. Plus, it smelled terrible. If you use grass clippings, let them dry out first and apply them in very thin layers. Choose the right material and your garden will thrive. This next question is critical. How exactly should I be watering my tomato plants? Believe it or not, there is a right way and a very wrong way to do this. The biggest mistake you can make is standing over your plants with a hose and spraying the leaves like it is raining. Tomatoes absolutely hate having wet leaves. When water splashes up from the soil onto the bottom leaves, it carries fungal spores with it. This is exactly how early blight and other terrible diseases start spreading. The myth that plants need a shower to cool down is totally false. You must water your tomatoes right at the base, directly onto the soil. A drip irrigation system or a soaker hose is the ultimate secret weapon for a healthy tomato patch. It delivers water slowly and deeply right to the roots where it is needed. Let me tell you about a huge turnaround I had. 3 years ago, my plants always looked yellow and diseased by August. I switched entirely to ground-level drip watering, and now my plants stay lush and green right until the first freeze. Remember, deep watering encourages deep root growth. Shallow, frequent watering makes the roots lazy. Water deeply, water at the base, and keep those leaves dry. Let us talk about survival. A viewer from a colder climate asks, how do I keep my strawberry plants alive through the freezing winter? Strawberries are remarkably tough, but they do need a little help from you to survive extreme cold. The secret to overwintering strawberries is, you guessed it, mulching. But this is a different kind of mulching. You are not just covering the soil, you are covering the entire plant. Once the ground freezes solid in late fall, you need to pile about 4 inches of straw directly over the top of your strawberry plants. A common myth is that the cold air kills the plants. Actually, what kills them is the freezing and thawing cycle. If the sun warms the soil on a Tuesday and it freezes hard on a Wednesday, it pushes the plant out of the ground, exposing those delicate roots. The straw acts like a heavy winter coat, keeping the ground temperature consistently cold and frozen. Do not cover them too early, though. If you cover them while it is still warm, they might rot or start growing too soon under the mulch. I learned this the hard way and lost a dozen plants to crown rot. Wait until the ground is hard, tuck them in with straw, and they will burst back to life in the spring. Here is another tomato tragedy we need to solve. Why do my almost ripe tomatoes suddenly split wide open and crack down the sides? You wait weeks for that perfect red tomato, and right before you pick it, it splits open and fruit flies move in. This happens because of a sudden explosion of water. Imagine you have a balloon that is almost completely full. If you hook it up to a fire hose, it is going to pop. Your tomatoes act exactly the same way. If your garden goes through a dry spell, the skin of the tomato gets tough. If you suddenly get a massive rainstorm, or if you overwater them to make up for the dry spell, the inside of the fruit swells faster than the tough skin can stretch. Boom, it cracks. Many people think cracking is caused by a disease, but it is purely environmental. The best way to prevent this is, once again, consistent watering and a thick layer of mulch to buffer the soil moisture. If I know a massive thunderstorm is coming, and I have tomatoes that are just starting to turn colour, I will actually go out and pick them early. They will ripen perfectly on the kitchen counter, safe from splitting. Do not let the rain ruin your perfect harvest. Since we are talking so much about mulch, I have to warn you about a very common and dangerous mistake. It is called the mulch volcano. Someone asked, if mulch is so good, should I pile it up high around the stems of my plants to give them extra support? The answer is a massive no. Piling mulch directly against the stem of a tomato plant or over the crown of a strawberry plant is a death sentence. When wet mulch constantly touches the stem, it creates a dark, damp environment that is absolutely perfect for stem rot and pests. It literally suffocates the bark and the plant tissues. There is a crazy myth that more mulch is always better. While thick mulch is good for the soil, you must always leave a small gap around the actual base of the plant. Imagine you are wearing a heavy winter scarf. You want it around your neck, but you do not want it pulled tightly over your mouth and nose. I once helped a community garden where volunteers had piled wood chips 6 inches high against every single tomato stem. Within 2 weeks, half the plants had completely collapsed from rot. We had to dig them all out and brush the mulch back. Always leave a 2-inch breathing ring around your plants. Let us dive into the fascinating world of companion planting. A question I get all the time is, does planting basil next to my tomatoes actually make the tomatoes taste better? Companion planting is the idea that certain plants help each other grow better when planted side by side. The idea that basil magically changes the flavor profile of a growing tomato is mostly an old gardening myth. However, planting basil next to tomatoes is still a fantastic idea. Why? Because the strong smell of the basil confuses pests. Insects that are looking for the smell of a tomato plant get overwhelmed by the basil and fly somewhere else. Another amazing companion for tomatoes is the marigold flower. Marigolds release a chemical into the soil that repels root knot nematodes, which are microscopic worms that destroy tomato roots. I always plant a border of bright orange marigolds around my tomato beds. Not only does it look absolutely beautiful, but my pest problems have dropped dramatically. Just remember, companion planting is not a magic shield. It will not stop a severe infestation, but it is a brilliant natural strategy to keep your garden ecosystem healthy and balanced. Here is a great question for those of you who already have an established strawberry patch. A viewer asks, "My strawberry bed is 3 years old and it looks terrible. The berries are tiny. Do I need to rip it all out and start over?" The answer is no. You just need to renovate the patch. Strawberry plants lose their vigor after a few years. After they finish fruiting in the middle of summer, they need a hard reset. This process is called renovation. The scariest part of this is that you literally have to mow them down. Take a pair of shears or raise your lawnmower to its highest setting and cut off all the old, tired leaves. Just be very careful not to cut the crowns. It sounds totally crazy, and there is a myth that doing this will kill the plants, but it actually forces them to grow fresh, healthy new leaves before winter comes. After you cut off the leaves, pull out the weeds, thin out the oldest plants, and give them a good feeding of compost. I was terrified the first time I did this. I looked at the bare, chopped-up stems and thought I ruined everything. But 3 weeks later, the patch was a sea of bright, beautiful green. Renovation brings your old patch back to life. Let us talk about gravity. Why do my tomato plants always fall over, and what is the best way to support them? Left to their own devices, tomatoes are naturally vining plants that want to crawl along the ground, but letting them do that in a home garden is a recipe for rot and disease. You must support them. The biggest mistake people make is buying those tiny, flimsy wire cones from the hardware store. Those cones are fine for peppers, but a healthy tomato plant will crush that cone by July. It is a myth that a 3-foot cage is enough. For big, indeterminate tomatoes, you need serious support. You can build tall wooden stakes and tie the main stem to them as it grows. Or you can use the Florida weave method, where you weave heavy string between strong posts to hold the plants up. Last year, I built custom cages out of heavy-duty concrete reinforcing wire. They are 6 feet tall and indestructible. My tomatoes climbed all the way to the top and produced incredible fruit. Do not underestimate how heavy a tomato plant gets when it is loaded with water and fruit. Give them strong support early, before they become an unmanageable mess. Now we have to address the enemies of the garden. A viewer sent me an angry message saying something is taking exactly 1 bite out of every single red strawberry I have. How do I stop it? Welcome to the war on garden pests. If half your berry is missing, you are likely dealing with birds, squirrels, or chipmunks. They see that bright red colour and dive in. There is an old myth that if you paint small rocks red and scatter them in the patch before the berries ripen, the birds will peck the rocks, get frustrated, and leave the real berries alone. Let me tell you, birds are smarter than that. The only true way to protect your harvest from birds is physical exclusion. You need to put bird netting over hoops above your plants. But what if the damage is slimy holes near the bottom of the berry? That is the work of slugs. Slugs hide under the mulch during the day and feast at night. A brilliant and easy trick is to make a beer trap. Bury a shallow cup in the soil so the rim is level with the ground, and pour in some cheap beer. The slugs are attracted to the yeast, fall in and drown. It sounds ridiculous, but I catch dozens of them this way every single week. Protect your berries because you worked hard for them. Here is an interesting question from an indoor grower. If I am growing tomatoes and strawberries inside a greenhouse, do I still need to use mulch? The environment inside a greenhouse is completely different from outside. It is protected from the wind and the heavy rain. However, the answer is still absolutely yes. Mulching inside a greenhouse is just as important, but for a slightly different reason. Inside a closed structure, humidity is your biggest enemy. If you have bare soil, water is constantly evaporating into the air, making the greenhouse incredibly humid. High humidity combined with heat is an invitation for catastrophic fungal diseases on your tomatoes. By laying down a layer of mulch, you stop that rapid evaporation. You keep the soil moisture in the ground where the roots need it, and you keep the air much drier. It is a dangerous myth to think indoor plants do not need soil protection. A friend of mine built a beautiful high-tunnel greenhouse but left the soil bare. By midsummer, condensation was dripping from the ceiling and his plants melted from disease. Once he added straw mulch, the humidity dropped and the problem vanished. Always mulch, no matter where you are growing. Let us clear up some major confusion about buying tomato plants. What is the difference between determinate and indeterminate tomatoes? If you do not know the answer to this, you might accidentally ruin your entire harvest. Determinate tomatoes are bush varieties. They grow to a specific, predetermined size, set all their fruit at once, and then they are pretty much done. These are perfect for making big batches of sauce or canning because you get a huge harvest all in 1 week. Indeterminate tomatoes are vining varieties. They will keep growing taller and producing new fruit continuously until the frost kills them. Here is the dangerous myth. Many people think you should prune the suckers on all tomato plants. If you aggressively prune a determinate bush tomato, you are literally cutting off your entire harvest. They need those branches to produce their one big flush of fruit. Only prune indeterminate vining types. I made this exact mistake my first year gardening. I pruned a row of determinate Roma tomatoes until they looked like sad little palm trees. I got exactly 3 tomatoes from the whole row. Always check the plant tag before you buy. Knowing what type you have changes everything about how you care for it. Here is a vital question about feeding your plants. When and how should I fertilize my strawberries for the biggest, sweetest berries? Timing is absolutely everything when it comes to fertilizing strawberries. The biggest myth is that you should dump a ton of heavy nitrogen fertilizer on them early in the spring, right as they wake up. If you give them too much nitrogen in the spring, the plant gets confused. It will put all of its energy into growing massive, beautiful green leaves, but it will forget to produce flowers. You will have the prettiest, greenest patch with 0 fruit. The absolute best time to apply a heavy, balanced fertilizer is during the renovation period we talked about earlier, right after they finish fruiting in the middle of summer. This feeds the plant as it builds the fruit buds for the following year. In the early spring, if you must feed them, use a fertilizer that is very low in nitrogen but high in potassium and phosphorus, which promotes blooming. I switched my feeding schedule 3 years ago, focusing on feeding the soil with compost in the fall and summer. My spring harvests have tripled in size. Feed them at the right time and they will reward you. Let us solve another ugly tomato problem. Why do my green tomatoes have large, pale, papery white patches on the sides facing the sun? This is exactly what it looks like. It is sunburn, officially known as sun scald. Tomatoes love the heat and they love the sun, but the actual fruit needs protection. There is an old, very stubborn gardening myth that you must pluck off the leaves around the tomato clusters so the direct sunlight can hit the fruit to make it ripen faster. This is entirely false. Tomatoes ripen based on temperature and a gas they produce called ethylene, not direct sunlight. If you strip away the leaves and expose the naked green fruit to the blazing afternoon sun, the skin literally cooks and turns white and papery. The fruit is ruined. The leaves are there for a reason. They act like a protective umbrella, providing a canopy of shade for the developing fruit. I once aggressively pruned the leaves off a beautiful heirloom tomato plant because I wanted to show off the huge fruit to my friends. 2 days later, a heat wave hit, and every single tomato got sun scald. Leave the canopy intact. Let the leaves do their job to protect your harvest. We had several questions asking about artificial mulches. Is it a good idea to use black plastic sheeting as a mulch in my home vegetable garden? Walk into any commercial farm and you will see rows of shiny black plastic. It is very popular, but it comes with serious pros and cons for a home gardener. The main benefit of black plastic is that it blocks 100% of weeds and it heats up the soil very quickly in early spring. This is fantastic for heat-loving crops. But here is the major downside and the myth of perfection. Plastic does not let water through. If you use plastic mulch, you absolutely must install a drip irrigation hose underneath it before you plant. If you rely on rain or a sprinkler, the water will just run off the plastic and your plants will die of thirst. Furthermore, during the peak heat of summer, black plastic can actually make the soil too hot, cooking the roots of your tomatoes. Unlike straw or wood chips, plastic adds zero nutritional value back into the soil, and at the end of the year, it just goes straight into the garbage. For a backyard garden, organic mulches are almost always a healthier, more sustainable choice for your soil ecosystem. Our final question for today's session is about the foundation of everything. A viewer asks, no matter what I plant or how much I water, my plants always look yellow and stunted. What am I doing wrong? The harsh truth is, it is probably your soil. You cannot build a great house on a terrible foundation. There is a huge myth that if your plants look sick, you just need to pour more liquid chemical fertilizer on them. Fertilizer is like taking a vitamin pill. It helps, but it cannot replace a healthy diet. If your dirt is hard, compact clay, or pure sand with no organic matter, roots cannot grow and nutrients get washed away. Before you worry about pruning, mulching, or varieties, you must test your soil pH and add compost. Compost is the ultimate cure for bad soil. It adds life, improves drainage, and holds moisture. A few years ago, I helped a friend who had given up on gardening because everything died. We spent one afternoon digging 3 inches of rich, dark compost into his beds. We didn't change the watering or the sunlight. The next year, his tomatoes were 6 feet tall. If you are struggling, stop buying fancy fertilizers and start buying compost. Feed the soil, and the soil will feed the plants. And there you have it. We have covered the good, the bad, and the ugly of growing strawberries, tomatoes, and mastering the art of mulching. The most mind-blowing takeaway today is just how interconnected everything is. From realizing that overwatering causes blossom end rot, to understanding that a simple layer of straw mulch can save your plants from a deadly heatwave, it all comes down to working with nature, not against it. By ditching those old gardening myths, pruning your suckers correctly, planting at the right depth, and keeping that soil covered, you are setting yourself up for the biggest, tastiest harvest you have ever had. Gardening is a constant learning process, and every mistake is just a lesson for next season. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you learned something new, please hit that subscribe button and smash the like button so this video can help other gardeners out there. Now it is your turn. I want you to head down to the comments and tell me, what is the very next thing you are going to change in your garden based on what you learned today? I will be reading and replying to as many as I can. Until next time, happy gardening!